In this episode of Spec Talk, we'll talk about undervalued and overlooked later printings. Let's jump right into it. Gotham City Sirens #1 has a second print with a red background. It is the first official appearance of the Gotham City Sirens as a team, which is Harley, Poison Ivy, and Catwoman. And there's also a 1 in 25 variant, which is pretty tough as well. But for the second print, there's only 60 on the census, and only 9 of those are 9/8. That makes for a really scarce slab, and it's definitely something to think about if you come across a high-grade copy. It might be worth sending in. Recent Raws sold for around $40, and graded 8.5 has also recently left eBay. GPA has the last sold on a 9/8 dating back to 2017, pre-spike, and even then it sold for $685. Yet last year, a 9/6 through a 9/4 would net you between $100 and $200. The 1 in 25 has a low CGC census as well, only 168 copies. But 116 of those are 9/8, super top heavy. But that's still a notoriously expensive 9/8. Modern Comics reprinted a lot of the classic Charlton issues. Back in the 70s, a lot of great Steve Ditko work, and even some first appearances. Captain Atom #83 is a reprint of the first appearance of Blue Beetle Ted Kord, who not only is the main Blue Beetle, but is probably the biggest character to come out of Charlton. They also reprinted a lot of issues like Blue Beetle #1, The First Question, Peacemaker #1, First Punch of Judy, and plenty of other minor to middle class keys. But Atom 83 has only 30 in the census, and the highest graded copy is a 9.8, which according to GPA sells for between $26 and $40. That's a price point I can justify as heavily undervalued. And strangely enough, a recent sale for a CBCS 5.5 slab holds just over $300. Raws recently sold anywhere from $8 to $20. It's definitely a book that I think personally is a little bit undervalued because it's so tough to get the first print of 83. So getting the modern reprint, and it's still, from the 70s? I would say that's still a decent secondary key. Darth Maul #2 is first appearance of the iconic Cad Bane, still one of my favorite modern Star Wars characters, and he's a great villain. His appearance in Book Boba Fett is a highlight for the show. Check out my video on that if you haven't already. But not only does this book have some variants, it's got a tough 1 in 25 and a scarce second print. It's tough to notice if you're not looking for it, but they added some stars to the black backdrop of the cover. And it says second printing right above the barcode. But all that is still very easy to miss. There's some copies online, but I wait for your LCS to have it because who knows, they might miss it too. And the Star Wars books are all kind of down right now overall. Shockingly, only 90 copies of this book are in the CGC census, and 38 of those are 9/8. Recent Raws sold for, I think, a best offer on 45, and GPA has the 12-month average on this book at a 9/8, just over $450. But the last sold in October of 22, falling all the way down to $158. Less than half of the year's average, going back to the peak of his appearance in Boba Fett and, the peak from last year. Definitely a huge fall off on the book, but even still, I would keep an eye out for maybe a raw copy at your LCS that they might not notice is a second print after all. JCPenney had a promotion running through their catalog where you could order a comic, believe it or not. And they did a lot of Marvel issues for the 30th anniversary, and I picked Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man #27 to talk about, not only because it's a great issue, but it is Frank Miller's first work on Daredevil. It's really the biggest main key to come out of this section of JCPenney reprints, and it's a great issue. It's a quick way to catch the JCPenney reprints is by that corner box. That Spidey symbol means it's a JCPenney reprint. The census only has 50 copies, and GPA has the last 9/8 sold at only $40, which honestly is kind of a steal considering this is a great book, and that's roughly graders' cost. The last Raw sold for a $2 lot for $8. So, $4 on eBay? Can't really go wrong, but you can find these JCPenney reprints in the cheap bins. I got my copy for 10 cents at LCS, a few others some years back. So there's just something fun to keep an eye out for in those cheap bins. You never know what you're going to find. Now, the corner box isn't the only thing JCPenney changed up. On books like this, Fandoms for number 67, there are very few others that were distributed through JCPenney in these multiplex, including 15 comics. Not many of them turned out to be keys, but this one CGC states as first cameo of him and his first origin, so I'd argue that's a pretty decent key. But the best way to tell this book, besides the paper quality and difference, is the back cover having a Stridex ad, and the interior ads are all updated to 94. This is another one of those books with only 60 copies in the census, with 4 9/8s, and GPA's last sold on a 9/8 back in 2021 for only $80. Raw copies sold between $15 and $30, but really this is one of those, if you can't afford or you can't find a Fandoms 467 at the time, and you're a big Adam Warlock fan and you need it for your run, this is a great run filler for a whole lot cheaper than the actual issue costs you. Batman 362, similar to the JCPenney reprints, but it's a little bit more random, is the Mervyn's Department Store reprint. The corner box on this was changed, and to my knowledge, it was the only book they done this to. Why? I have no idea. It's a bit random, but it's a little something to tuck away in the back of your head while you're flipping through those boxes. Just something fun to keep an eye out for. And I don't really see too many of these out there. If you look on the census, this book has a release date a few years before, or a few years after the original copy, and only a whopping 6 copies are on the census. I imagine GPA sold are a little bit off, considering it's not an easy thing to find, and it's very easy to overlook. But according to them, the last sold copy was a 7.5 in 2009 for $20. I guess I'd give somebody $20 for this out of the novelty, but it's nothing that's not a slab I'd hunt for. But all the recent Raws are either direct or newsstand copies, so who knows, maybe this is a harder book to find than I think it is. But it's just something cool to keep an eye out for, not that I would really sweat collecting in your personal collection. Conan #1 was reprinted under issue 22 because Marvel had lost the artwork in the mail for the actual issue and something had to come out on time. That's a thing that modern comics don't do, but it sort of reminds me of that Ghost Rider issue 10 where Hulk is on the cover, but the interior art was changed because they didn't go through with it, and the cover was already printed. So they just reprinted Marvel Spotlight issue of Ghost Rider's first appearance and just threw it out in there. And it's kind of what they did with this issue. This is the first time Conan #1, the first appearance of Conan in the Marvel Universe, was ever reprinted in, well, Conan 22. And that's all explained in the Hyborian page in the backup. And there are 252 Conan 22s in the census and 1 Pence variant as well. Only 18 9/8s, but considering it's a book from 73, I'm not surprised. The 12-month average on this iconic 9/8 is a whopping $1,560. Recent Raws only go for between $15 and $30, and a graded copy has also been purchased on eBay this month. Multiple graded copies. But $1,560 is huge for especially kind of like a non-key, minor key book, but it's really to reprint. But it makes sense. It's an old book, and there's only, what was it, 18 9/8s. So if you got one of those 9/8s, I think at that price point, me personally, I'd probably get rid of it. Whitman has famously repackaged countless comics in the past. Everyone kind of knows about Star Wars and the Batman issues, Micronauts, Battlestar Galactica, and even the multiplex with Shogun Warriors on the front. But this book is super scarce. DC Comics Presents #22 is usually a dollar bin book. It's fodder, it's a great toilet read, just something to flip through. But the Whitman on this issue is extremely rare and such a scarce book, it commands some money. I've even seen low grades go for hundreds of dollars, and online people command thousands for the high grade copies. It's a book to keep an eye out for when you're hunting in those flea markets or even in those dollar bins. That would be a worthwhile flip, considering GPA has a Whitman 8.5 reportedly selling for $12.97 back in 2022. Not that long ago. And back in 2019, a 6.5 sold for an astronomical $2,295, which is ridiculous. The census has 36 Whitmans, and the highest grade so far is 8.5, and only 3 copies at that. No recent Raws have sold online, and that's for sure a book to keep on your radar in the cheap bins. I almost wonder if this book was used for someone to move some money around and kind of spark this non-key to skyrocket. But again, who knows? It's still, at the end of the day, a great book to keep in the back of your mind. Howard the Duck #1 is first appearance of Gwenpool, and not only has this book been getting hot recently because it is Gwenpool's first true appearance, but there's a second print no one's really been talking about. They swapped around the border on the bottom and rearranged the barcode, flipped it up. And although this isn't a major key or anything, people rush to eBay. And for this book, no one really knew about it. Not that no one knew about it. Nobody really cared about it for a while, and it's got hot in the last couple of weeks. But it's nothing I would rush eBay for, and I wouldn't recommend anyone to rush eBay for, because you could probably still find it out there in the cheap bins. But a second print, 9/8, sells for around $80, marked as the end of last year, 2022. And the census doesn't even give it its own subcategory, not the one that I can find. Recent raws land between $10 and $20, but again, I would wait to find one in the cheap bins, especially if it's not burning a hole in your collection, because I'm sure you can find it out there. I've definitely seen them. Galaxy's Edge number 4, this second print is a tough one. Not only is the first print incentive cover super underordered and not too common in comparison to other modern Star Wars issues, but this second printing sporting Dr. Aphra on the cover is a tough one to find. And it's another one that goes for a few bucks. Plus, with Aphra always being hot, it seems her first appearance is so overgraded, those secondary scarce Aphra keys are worth hunting for. Only 12 of these are in the census, 7 of those being 9.8s, and, you know, it's one that's worth grading if you can find a near mint copy, considering there's so few of them in the census. The 9-day average lands it at $450, and the 9.2 drops all the way down to just $60. Recent raws online have sold for $140 all the way down to $20. So this is one that's kind of jumping around, and it's one I'd keep an eye peeled on, considering Aphra is a given and Darth Vader 3 has half its print run in the census, and I think her secondary keys have a lot more room to jump than Vader 3 ever will. But that's all for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed. Follow me here and on Facebook and Instagram for more daily content, and if you haven't already, join the Facebook group Fandoms Unleashed for a great inside look at comics and amazing discussions every single day. But until next time, all linked in the description.